Hi, Zalna here, and welcome back to my vlog where I talk about law and policy and how you can influence it. In today's video, I want to talk about the national state of disaster, the national lockdown, and how that impacts your right. Also, how all of that would differ in the case of a state of emergency. So, as a citizen, our rights are guaranteed in terms of the Bill of Rights of the Constitution. So, I have the right to freedom of speech, freedom of movement, the right to not be detained without a due process. So all of this is in the Constitution. However, there's also a principle in our law that seeks to strike a balance between my private right as well as that of the greater good. So this principle is reflected in Section 36 of our Constitution. It's also known as the Limitations Clause, and it sets out the criteria as to when your right can be limited. It also says that, your right cannot be arbitrarily infringed without a due process, and your right can only be infringed in terms of a law of general application. So it has to be an act of law that applies equally to all citizens in the country. So the Disaster Management Act of 2002 defines a disaster, in this case a national disaster, as a progressive or sudden, widespread or localized natural or human-caused occurrence which causes or threatens death, injury, illness, and is of such a magnitude that it affects our ability to cope with it. So you'd recall from previous videos where I spoke about the principle of separation of powers between the executive government, the legislative who makes the law, and the judiciary that implements it. So our Constitution is based on the principle of separation of powers. In terms of the declaration of the national state of disaster, it essentially gives the executive government power or to take control over measures to curb the disaster. We have regulations on restrictions on international travel, closing of schools and educational facilities, restrictions on gathering of more than 100 people. On Sunday, we heard that there will be further measures, including a lockdown with the exclusion of essential services. So basically what this means is that you have to stay indoors, you have to stay at your home, you can only go out if you need to buy food, need to see a medical doctor or see a pharmacist. The National Defence Force has also been deployed to assist the police. So in terms of this stage that we are in now, your rights are still guaranteed under the Constitution, under the Bill of Rights. But remember, the aim of this national lockdown is to flatten the curve of the increasing number of COVID-19 infections. It's therefore important that you are a responsible citizen and stay home and only go out when it's absolutely necessary to do so. So if we don't act responsibly and the infections rate increase and government is forced to introduce a state of emergency, in such a scenario, some of our rights would be suspended. I heard in the news the other day of a couple that were tested positive for the virus, and then they refused to be quarantined. The state had to make an application to the court to force them to be quarantined. So in a state of emergency, it's very likely that the state would not need your permission or even a court order to quarantine you if they suspect you of being infected with the virus. Another thing also is that in a state of emergency is that the National Defence Force would be deployed not to assist the police but to take over. The state of emergency is implemented under the watchful eye of Parliament. If your right has been infringed during the state of emergency, you can go to court to have it declared unconstitutional, but this would be after the event has taken place. So just note the interaction between the three branches of government, the executive, Parliament, and the judiciary. So clearly none of us want the infections to rise and nor do we want the next phase to be a state of emergency. So my advice and recommendation to you would be that to stay home and stay safe, and only go out when it's absolutely necessary to do so. Please also feel free to comment on this video, and also like and share.